Hello, I'm Dr. Ruth Roberts, an integrative veterinarian with 26 years of practice experience and the creator of the original Crockpet diet. I want to give a big thanks to all the folks that made the Animal Wellness Summit possible. You're going to hear from many different speakers offering many different options and points of view. I think that what's important is to choose what makes the most sense for you and your pets. There's no absolute right or wrong approach. There's what works for you and your pets. So today I'm going to discuss a different way of looking at nutrition for pets using concepts that are being proven true in human nutrition. In particular, if you haven't read about the Pure study that was recently released, I'd advise you to check it out. It upends current nutrition concepts on the human side, and it proves once and for all that high-carb diets and processed foods are at the root of the health epidemics we're facing: obesity, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and any major killer you can think of. I'm also going to discuss how to use different types of food as medicine to improve your pet's health using both functional medicine and traditional Chinese veterinary medicine, or TCVM. Lastly, I want you to be confident that you can make the healthiest food on the planet for your pet. You're going to hear a lot about different ways to prepare pet food, especially a raw diet. Because I'm trained in TCVM, my slant is to use cooked food to help animals with already compromised digestive function improve. In these times, I find myself asking what else I can do for my patients, and I think you are as well, or you're at least curious about options because you wouldn't be here otherwise. The old paradigm of doctor knows best is gone. Human medicine and veterinary medicine has lagged behind in offering options for improving quality of life for people and animals with human disease. It's often said that doctors who have faced serious illness themselves become better doctors, and I believe that's true. My own illness is what forced me to learn new tricks. And as I healed, I understood that I could apply the same techniques to dogs and cats to improve their health. So who am I? Most doctors like to show you all their credentials to make you think that they know more than the average bear. These are mine above. But frankly, my skill comes from being able to step back and look at what's recommended in conventional medicine, see where that is failing, and find new paradigms to offer comfort, hope, and health. I've been practicing since 1990 and retired in 2016 due to health issues. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. First, though, I want to share with you what started me down this path of alternative medicine. My hope is that it will explain to you why I believe food is the first thing that needs to be discussed to help return a dog or cat back to health. So why the woo-woo medicine? I want to show you several pictures that are going to give you the big reasons why I started down this alternative path. This is me in 2004 with my beautiful pumpkin. I weighed in at over 210 pounds. I had fibromyalgia, cervical disc disease, which was causing a tremendous amount of pain, as well as making my right arm numb most days. I also had inflammatory bowel disease and C. diff. I was unable to stand up from the floor without assistance, and I had horrible fatigue. But yet I was still working. If you're not familiar with C. diff, it's a bug that's killing people because there's such horrible antibiotic resistance. It wipes out the immune system in the intestines, and interestingly, its current best treatment is a fecal transplant. So this is me today. Using nutrition, exercise, and supplements, I was able to return to health. I became a bodybuilder and was able to return to full-time practice for 10 years. Unfortunately, I was exposed to toxic mold in 2015, and I had to retire in 2016 due to cognitive issues. I contracted C. diff again and developed SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Using the power of nutrition, I've been able to control SIBO symptoms and improve my cognitive function that I can return to work on the original Crockpet diet. While I'm not able to return to clinical practice, I am able to help people use the power of food and nutritional supplementation to improve their pet's health. The next big reason for learning TCVM and functional medicine is Arnold. Arnold lived to be 17, and the last 6 months were tough. He had severe muscle wasting, and I had run out of options for him. Weakness and just being plain worn out is what did him in. My inability to offer him other options for comfort is what drove me to study alternative medicine. As the saying goes, his mind was willing, but the flesh was weak. I didn't want other elderly animals to suffer as he did. My third reason for learning alternative medicine is Pumpkin. At the age of 9, she developed bacterial endocarditis and collapsed quite suddenly one day. Bacterial endocarditis is an infection of the heart valve, and on ultrasound, there was a 1-centimeter lesion sitting on her mitral valve. Bacterial endocarditis kills most of the patients it affects. I did conventional therapy, used antibiotics and medication to stabilize her heart disease, but she was still weak and lethargic. I had already started acupuncture classes, and my teachers were constantly talking about food therapy. Pumpkin would not let me needle her, but she took herbs, and I started home cooking for her. Her valve lesion reduced to 3 millimeters in size over a month and a half, and she returned to normal activity. Her heart murmur persisted, and I continued to give her heart failure medication. But ultimately, she died at 13 years of age after a very short battle with congestive heart failure. To me, gaining 4 years of high-quality life and dying rather suddenly after contracting a disease that kills most patients within 30 days was a miracle. So how did I alter my health in the face of disease that's debilitating at best and often steals people's lives from them? Though I had to retire in 2006, the main treatment for me was how I ate. I changed my diet. I ate only fresh whole foods, no processed products including bread or pasta, and eliminated sugar other than a small amount of fruit. I also had acupuncture, developed a nutritional supplement program in conjunction with the doctor I was working with. I began to exercise routinely and ultimately used a rotation and elimination diet to fix the leaky gut issues. So this made me ask myself, if I got well using these simple changes, can I do this for pets? I asked myself, why do we feed pets the way we do? If humans have a grain sensitivity, do pets? Do pets have leaky gut syndrome? Do they have to have a diet that's balanced for every bite? Or can we take the approach of using whole foods rather than kibble to provide excellent and easily digested nutrition? To start answering these questions, there was very little information available on the veterinary side, so I started looking at how we got where we are today by looking for answers on the human side of nutrition. Since the 70s, the government issued a food pyramid based on a flawed study paid for by the sugar industry. But I wondered, what's the government recommended over time, as that's most people's source of food or nutrition information. The first food chart I found was this one from World War II. During the war, people were given food coupons as food was being rationed. To help people make better choices about the nutrition, the government issued this food wheel. Notice the 3 groups out of the 7 are actually vegetables, green and yellow, red and orange, and then starchy veggies. Grains are a small portion of the diet. Does that sound familiar? Can you remember people telling you to eat the rainbow and that all those colors in the vegetables are actually really good for you? This is the food pyramid that was issued starting in the 70s, and the picture is of its last incarnation in 1992. As you can see, it's weighted heavily on grains and processed food and dairy. It's part of the low-fat diet era, and the idea that eating less fat would help us control our cholesterol. Do you see any lobby influences? I can definitely see the corn and sugar industry's hand in this pyramid. In 2011, the government updated the food pyramid to My Plate. As you can see, it calls for increased vegetables, decreases in grains, and no mention of fat. Dairy is still a large portion of the recommended diet. My guess is that the dairy and grain industry had a heavy hand in designing this. So where have these guidelines taken us? Straight to 12-year-olds that weigh 250 pounds or more. To kids that are developing type 2 diabetes, which is an adult disease. They are having strokes and other serious heart disease at 12 and under. As a result of these guidelines, 65% of U.S. adults are either overweight or are obese, as are 33% of our children. So what are the end result of the obesity in humans? Heart disease, kidney disease, diabetes, arthritis, cancer, and organ dysfunction, all the itis diseases. Broken down into functional medicine concepts, these are all diseases of chronic inflammation. Fat was considered to be an inert organ that doesn't have a function other than to stretch out your pants. But in reality, it's an inflammatory organ, which produces and stores inflammatory molecules. This is why obesity triggers all of these disease states. So how did the government manipulating our diet end up affecting our pets? Before 1950, most pets ate our leftovers and what we prepared for them. As I mentioned, in World War II, there was food rationing, and the government was actually considering a mass euthanasia of pets to make sure there's enough food for humans to eat. As a result, Mark Morris, who founded the Hills Corporation, developed an emergency pet ration of beaks, feathers, and corns finely ground together. His intent was to save pets by providing them this emergency ration. Unfortunately, this concept of using food byproducts stuck, and so the bag, inexpensively produced with foods that humans cannot eat, became the norm. In the 1970s, Alpo really was meat. Now it's mostly corn byproduct and as is much of the other commercial pet food. We're going to look at a couple of ingredient labels from common pet foods, and I want you to think about what is similar between them and what's different. So here's Beneful, which is one of the most popular foods in the country. You can see that corn is the #1 ingredient, then chicken byproduct meal, and then more corn, wheat, and a little bit of fat. Beneful touts itself as being full of healthy vegetables, but propylene glycol and sugar, are those healthy? You'll notice that vegetables come after some of the minerals and dyes, and most of the food is actually corn or some other carbohydrate source. Here's the ingredient list of prescription JD diet, which is supposed to help improve joint function and decrease pain. As you look at this, the ingredient list isn't terribly different from Beneful. And why is feeding powdered cellulose a good thing? Were pets really designed to eat paper? Again, this diet is largely carbohydrate-based and simple carb-based, which is pro-inflammatory. Flaxseed is an emerging food allergen. Can you spot what makes this a joint diet? It's the glucosamine hydrochloride. Why do we need to buy this food with glucosamine built into it that's made with lousy foodstuffs instead of making a high-quality diet with whole foods and adding glucosamine and other supplements that can benefit joint function and decrease pain? This is the ingredient label for Orijen, which is a very popular and perceived to be an extremely high-quality dog food, and indeed it is one of the few that has not had any recalls in its history. It's grain-free, but it's still very high in carbohydrates with all the lentils, peas, and yams. It is made from real foods. Meat meals are always a big question mark as to what they're composed of, but this company is well respected and uses high-quality ingredients. Is this optimal nutrition for the dog? Or a cat? At the risk of being self-serving, here's the basic ingredient list in the original Crockpet diet. As you can see, it's a whole food diet made with all the vegetables you're seeing recommended for us to eat. Are all these diets equal in the quality of nutrition they provide? And who decides what should be in pet food? All of these diets meet AAFCO standards for life stages. And what does that mean? Who's AAFCO, and why do they set the standards? AAFCO stands for the American Association of Food Control Officials. It's an industry-run group, and they set minimum standards for pet foods. They're based on gross percentages of nutrients, and they use chemical determination of nutrients rather than food trials. They do not assess for nutritional bioavailability. I want to reiterate that these diets are balanced for the minimum nutrients required for all life stages. This does not take into account growth, disease, or changing requirements for older pets who often need higher protein levels. The National Research Council is a subsidiary of the National Academy of Sciences, and until 1974, they set the standards for nutrient content of pet foods. They focused on feeding trials versus chemical analysis to determine that the pet food actually was good for the pet. In 1985, the NRC proposed using an amino acid profile versus raw percentages. Currently, nutritional content of pet food is determined prior to processing. That means it's determined prior to the kibble being baked or extruded or cooked in any way. Clearly, that processing is going to destroy many vitamins, especially the B vitamins. AAFCO has made no attempt to ask its manufacturers to compensate for the loss of nutrient after cooking. Finally, because there's no effort to look at food quality, feathers are equal to high-quality beef in AAFCO's eyes. So does the food have what the bag says it has? Often it doesn't. How much of the nutrient value is lost during processing and storage? So how nutritious is the bag of food? It's looking less and less like we ought to feed our pets this stuff. But you know that, and that's why you're listening to this talk. So are we providing adequate nutrition? Does all life stages provide everything needed for every pet? If we have to feed less than the bag says, is a pet undernourished? And if the pet is sick, are we providing adequate nutrition for recovery? I'll grant you there are specific formulas for puppies and kittens and adult dogs as well as dogs that are performance dogs, but they still probably are lacking in adequate nutrition. So the answer to my questions is that no, we're not. If your pet can't get all the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients they need from food, then where do they come from? And sadly, the answer is nowhere unless you use a multivitamin and mineral supplement. This is why it's so important to use something to help supplement your pet's diet to help keep your pet healthy. And I will tell you that even with home cooking and raw diet, we often still need to use a multivitamin supplement simply because the nutrient value of food is not what it was 40 years ago. Our current farming methods deplete the soil of the micronutrients that are so vital for our health. So here's the forms of pet food that are currently available for your pets. Right now, most of the forms are bag or can, with some attempts of the bag to be raw, paleo, or grain-free. There are plenty of folks that can help you learn how to do a raw diet or home cook for your pets. And there are several companies that make raw diets. There's only one company that I'm aware of that attempts to ship and market whole foods that are pre-made into pet food. However, it contains a tremendous amount of gums, which often cause GI issues. So the first method available is the conventional bag and cans of food and prescription diets you probably know about for the most part. Pet food recalls, especially the first one in 2006, revealed that many of these components are imported and that one plant was making everyone's canned food, all the way from Beneville to the super premium brands. It also exposed much of the ugly side of pet food manufacturing and the fact that most manufacturers are in it for the money and not for the pet's health. I'd like to take a minute and talk more about prescription diets because most veterinarians are hung up on these things as a way to treat specific organ-based disease. If you look at labels for the food, they're still mostly chicken and corn, essentially no better than Beneful, with a supplement added to treat the health condition. The cost of these diets are astronomical and certainly don't represent the cost of the ingredients that are in them. The hypoallergenic prescription diets use ingredients such as hydrolyzed chicken feathers and soy to prevent the immune system from recognizing the protein components. These are hardly ideal foods for pets. These are the ingredient panels of 3 different prescription diets. Can you tell what these prescription diets are supposed to do? The supplement that helps perform its function is highlighted. The first one is CD. Phosphoric acid is a urinary acidifier to help dissolve bladder stones. SD includes D-L-methionine, again for stone dissolution, and JD, or joint diet, includes glucosamine to help improve joint function. Can we not come up with a different idea? Can we use whole foods and add a supplement maybe? The raw diet's been on the scene for several decades, and it goes under several different names. The BARF diet stands for bones and raw food, and that's a very accurate description of what's in the diet. The goal is to feed the dog and cat what they would get by killing and eating prey. One of the concerns I have about raw diet is that of sustainability. If we're already discussing how much conventional food animal production is affecting the environment, and then we promote a high meat diet to feed dogs and cats, the sustainability issue becomes huge. We just don't have the resources to do this for everybody. The other issue is that perhaps it is an ancestral diet, but Canis familiaris evolved with Homo sapiens, and they've been eating our leftovers for at least 30,000 years, and that food was cooked. Cats are obligate carnivores, and they were much more self-reliant until recently. Raw diet for cats probably is a better model, but I can't find many cats that will eat it for reasons we'll discuss in a bit. So the pictures up top is what most of us believe the raw diet is, kind of chunks of organs and grossness in a bowl. Big kennels that feed raw feed more like this, and pet owners that feed raw mostly use these sanitary frozen chubs in packages. Most conventional veterinarians believe that your dog is going to die from salmonella when you feed this, when in reality you and your dog are much more likely to get salmonella from a bag of food. I've seen raw diets make an enormous difference for some pets, but in my hands, cooked food generally performs better in dogs and cats that have compromised digestion. This is how raw is promoted as the ancestral diet of dogs, showing a straight line from wolf to dog, but in reality, there was likely a progenitor species, and just as our progenitor species ate raw meat, the guy in front of the Homo neanderthalis in this picture, so did theirs. Canis familiaris showed up about the same time Neanderthals became extinct, and they had had fire for at least 20,000 years and had been cooking. Many anthropologists now believe that our dogs helped us, Homo sapiens, wage war on the Neanderthals and cause their extinction. So we made a great team even back then, sadly. The next idea I'd like to discuss is the paleo diet, the idea that we should be essentially eating what Homo sapiens were eating 30,000 years ago. This was a true hunter-gatherer diet, but it was not grain-free. Breads were baked over 30,000 years ago, and they were being made from gathered grains. Agriculture started only roughly 9 to 10,000 years ago, and at that point, grain and root crops were often grown in large-scale monocrop settings, which is why we've had famines throughout history since the advent of agriculture. The reason grains are so hotly debated now is that the gluten content of the current wheat varietal is at least 4 times the wild ancestral grain. Grains aren't evil, but if you're sensitive to gluten and zyme protein from corn, it's a miserable thing, and they make up an enormous percentage of our diet. Grain-free diets are supposed to be the closest thing to paleo and commercial dog food. They generally don't contain wheat, soy, or corn, but often contain barley, which is a glutinous grain, and rice. Even though these diets are free of wheat and corn, they're still really high-carb diets, so they're not truly a paleo diet. And sadly, the concept of being grain-free has ended up in these bastardized versions. I would guess that most of you wouldn't want to feed either of these 3 brands to your pets. But I do want you to understand what they're doing with marketing about the nutrition, but not actually doing anything to improve it. Cellulose keeps showing up in dog food, and I don't understand why that is, other than it's an inexpensive filler to offset the cost of some of the other ingredients. Cellulose is a wood pulp product, and feeding paper to dogs and cats makes no sense to me whatsoever. And now we come to home-cooked diets, which is really the way we fed pets until the late 40s, and sadly, it's not the way we feed ourselves anymore. In humans, they don't worry about being the diet about the diet being complete and balanced with every bite. Otherwise, we'd all be eating power bars or something similar. A few years ago, UC Davis did a study on home-cooked diets for pets that had a lot of my clients freaked out because they found that out of the 200 diets available online, only 12 were complete and balanced. Fortunately, I'd consulted with a board nutritionist to make sure that the diet was balanced, not for minimum standards, but for optimal nutrition. Conversely, home-cooked diet versions of the prescription diets are often a small amount of protein, a ton of rice, and no veggies. Added vitamins and mineral balance it, but how can this truly be nutritionally balanced? If by eyeball what appears to be balanced is not, then what does that mean for long-term health? Looking at these photos, which represent the standard American lunch of sandwich and chips, steamed spinach and fish, rice and beans and vegetables, a good vegetarian meal, and then everyone's favorite breakfast of coffee and a muffin top. You can pick out the ones that are balanced and not balanced, but how do we estimate if our pets' diets are balanced in terms of the macronutrients they need? A quick review of nutrition. The big chunks are called macronutrients, and they are protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are further broken down into simple carbs, which are sugar and high glycemic foods like bread, and then complex carbohydrates, which are usually vegetables and beans that contain high fiber content. Micronutrients are the details of the diet that either confer health or, if they are imbalanced or lacking, create health issues. So again, what's the current macro ratio recommended for dogs and cats? Before we get into that, let's try looking at these pictures once more and eyeballing what the MAC components are. Remember, carbohydrate is not separated out by simple or complex. So if we're looking at protein, fat, and carb percentages expressed in total percentage of the calories of the food, take a minute and kind of ballpark it, and then I'll do kind of the big reveal on the next slide. Hopefully it won't be too shocking. So in the sandwich meal pictured above, we've got 20% protein, 20% fat, and 60% carbohydrates. In the steamed fish and spinach, we've got 50% protein, 10% fat, and roughly 40% carbohydrate. In the beans and rice dish, we've got roughly 35% protein, 15%, and 50% carb. In the coffee and muffin picture, we've got roughly 5% protein, 30% fat, and 65% carbohydrate. Now my question to you is, are all these carbohydrates created equal? And you already know the answer. They're not. The 65% carbohydrate in that muffin is mostly sugar, versus the 50% of carbohydrate in the vegetarian dish is fibrous vegetables. This lets us remember that we're not comparing muffins to broccoli, and we need to be conscious of the actual food value in the carbohydrates. So here's the current macronutrient recommendation for humans, and you see that they've got a huge range. And so if we take a look at what sort of food we'd have to eat to get 1,600 calories of roughly a three-way split of protein, fat, and carb, what would that look like? I'm going to throw this chart up purely for reference, but it tells you how many calories are in each gram of protein, carbs, and fats. So you'll note that fats are far more calorie dense than the other carbs and proteins. And if this is something you're trying to sort out for yourself, I can't strongly recommend MyFitnessPal's app. It makes this process so much easier. So what does all of that turn out to be if we're going to go with that 30-30 split in terms of food? So we've got this breakfast of 3 eggs cooked in butter with a peach, lunch of 8 ounces of chicken breast, a tablespoon of olive oil, a couple of cups of cucumber, tomato, black beans, and some romaine lettuce. And then for dinner, a grass-fed New York strip steak, eggplant, kale, wild rice cooked in butter. So if you look at that visually, that's what these macronutrients add up to in terms of actual food. And that's a ton of food. Most of us would have a very hard time eating that volume of food if we'd been accustomed to eating the standard American diet. And in fact, most people have to ease into this gradually because they simply aren't accustomed to eating that much fiber. And if you try to eat a ton of fiber all at once, it's miserable with gas and bloating. So if we look at this chart again, it was heavy on vegetables, protein, and lighter on carbs, moderate on fat. And probably this hits that 30-30-30 split that we've been discussing. But that still doesn't answer our question. What are the macro recommendations for pets? And really, unfortunately, it's a big question mark. One study showed that dogs that were allowed to select the food themselves ate roughly 30% protein, 63% fat, and 7% carbohydrate. Cats probably need at least 50% protein, 40% fat, and 10% carbohydrate, although the protein and fat ratios may actually be flipped. Traditionally, performance dogs that are true athletes need more carbohydrate to fuel their activity, although that concept is changing as well. There are many human athletes that perform at top levels that are eating a keto or high-fat diet. So let's apply those macro concepts to some of the common pet foods. Based on the weight of ingredients listed on the panel, you can kind of ballpark the percentages of what is protein, fat, and carbohydrate. In case you're not familiar with that concept, the ingredients on the food label are listed in ingredient of volume of content in the diet. So if we look at Beneful and Science Diet, they're obviously heavily weighted towards carbs. Origin is higher in protein with a lower carb, and then Taste of the Wild is close to that 1/3 split that may be optimal. There's a lot of discussion about keto diets, and in fact they're being recommended for both cancer treatment and brain health, as well as weight loss. In cats, they are dry food addicts, and the pet food manufacturing companies have made them that by spraying the outside of kibble with a hydrolyzed oil. They've developed such a strong taste preference that they often will make themselves sick by not eating, and in fact develop hepatic lipidosis, which is really hard to get back under control. They are carb addicts, but they actually don't metabolize carbohydrates well, and they are also anxiety eaters. So how do some of the common cat foods stack up? Not very well. So, I mean, as you can see, most of these foods are still carbohydrate based. So why aren't we there yet? We know this is not what cats need to eat. Evocanned is probably the closest out of any of them. At least it's very low in carb, high in fat, low in, and moderate in protein. But the dry food version is not, which is quite interesting. The keto diet is currently being touted to optimize brain function and physiologic balance in humans, as well as treat cancer. And that's actually what I needed to eat in order to help improve my brain health. My macros are about 28% protein, 62% fat, and 10% carbohydrates. And all my veggies and a few treats like dark chocolate or strawberries are all the carbs I get. Rice, bread, all of that's not there anymore. So what diseases do cats actually get that are caused by how they eat? Well, bladder issues or fluted for one, kidney failure for two. Why? They need more water in their diet to prevent chronic dehydration. What else do they get? They get diabetes. And why? Because they're little carb addicts and they are not meant to metabolize that much in simple carbs, just as we aren't. That chronic high glucose messes up insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. If the cells can't get glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cell, all sorts of bad stuff happens. And ultimately, high carbs don't trigger satiety. Satiety is what tells you that you are full. And so, this meme of Snuggles switching to diet soda to make room for more cheeseburgers with dubious results is the absolute truth of what's happened in our society. Diet sodas actually created and worsened all of these diseases as far as obesity, diabetes, etc. Fat triggers satiety. So Deb Greco, a veterinary nutritionist, wrote an article about the Catkins diet probably close to 20 years ago now. Diabetes diets high in protein and fat had just hit the market and radically changed how we approach diabetes in cats, and we were able to put many cats into remission without ever needing insulin just by changing the way they eat. As far as bladder disease go, and kidney disease for that matter, it's imperative to get more fluid in the diet. The table above comes from a study where they looked at water intake and urine production in cats fed either a dry food or a moist food. The upshot of this study is that even though the cats that ate dry food drank almost 8 times the amount of water that the cats eating canned food did, they produced less than half the volume of urine. This is important because if the urine is super concentrated, it's easier for crystals to form, infections to take hold, and for the cat to develop chronic bladder irritation. As a result of that chronic dehydration, cats develop kidney disease because the kidneys are chronically overworked trying to get rid of waste products. So what's the easiest way to increase water consumption aside from plying your cat with a fire hose? Why don't we feed it to them? Cats are notoriously difficult to get to switch from dry food to canned food, and there are cats that simply will not convert to canned or cooked diet. If your cats are eating a canned food, your job is easier. If they're eating only dry food, it may take you months to convert them to a canned diet, and there are some cats that simply won't buy into the idea. I can't tell you how many cats that we reverted their kidney function back to normal and stopped their bladder disease simply by getting them to eat either canned or cooked food. One of the goals of this talk was to explain how I use food as medicine to treat disease and to maintain health. Traditional Chinese veterinary medicine, or TCVM, is based in an understanding of yin and yang. In our country, we think of these as opposites, but in reality they are duality, so in which one could not exist without the other. For example, if there were no darkness, one could not understand light, or so the theory goes. Food therapy is an integral part of TCVM and traditional Chinese medicine for people as well. Broken down into basic concepts, energetics of food are either cooling, warming, or neutral. We can use food to warm up a cool patient or to cool down a hot patient. Various foods have the ability to tonify the essential fluids, yin, yang, blood, and qi. When we apply that to an animal that has a deficiency of one or more of these substances, we are able to help them heal. Finally, there's an understanding that various methods of cooking can add too much heat to the food. Hence, in the South, we tend to prefer slow cooking, which adds less heat, versus high heat cooking. Functional medicine is a way of understanding health and disease in terms of systems of function instead of looking at organ system-based disease. Many diseases boil down to defects in 3 primary areas: poor digestion or assimilation, poor detoxification, and inflammation load on the body. Most chronic diseases have their roots in poor function in these areas, and improving that function will allow us to help improve the health of the patient. Functional medicine also recognizes that specific foods have specific properties which will help improve these functions. For instance, fatty fish is high in omega-3 fatty acids, so eating a great deal of salmon or taking a fish oil or krill oil supplement will improve the ability of the gut bacteria to make more anti-inflammatory molecules, as well as having a direct effect on overall inflammation in the body. So instead of treating allergic skin disease or dermatitis, we need to improve the ability of the patient to digest food and absorb the nutrients, to detoxify and get rid of the waste products which poison the body, and reduce inflammation, the itis in every disease. When I created TOCPD, the original Crockpet diet, I designed it for the patients I was seeing and the conditions or patterns of disharmony they were experiencing. Because I live in South Carolina, which is a hot, humid environment, foods that were cooling, drying, and were able to tonify blood helped to shift the pattern of hot, damp, blood-deficient patient. Most often, I was seeing these patients because they had cancer, arthritis, kidney disease, or one of the other many disease manifestations of this pattern. Functional medicine gave me a mechanism of understanding how to improve digestion, detoxification, and to reduce inflammation. In most of my patients, there was some sort of GI imbalance, which was often due to eating a pro-inflammatory diet high in simple carbohydrates. Changing what my patients ate gave me the ability to improve their daily life by supporting the gut flora and selecting for the good guys or probiotic organisms, which in turn improve the ability of the pet to digest, detoxify, and reduce the overall inflammation level. Using these combined concepts of food therapy from TCVM and improving systems of function from functional medicine has been the most potent tool in my toolbox. Change happens gradually, but in many patients, we could see a big improvement within 2 weeks of changing from the bag of food to cooked food, particularly if it had been a prescription diet. I've also seen it be as effective as medication. I had a bull mastiff patient named Thunder years ago. She developed horrible arthritis in her knees and had developed liver issues that prevented her from being able to take nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory pain meds. She refused to eat any of the herbal therapies we offered or supplements, and she also refused acupuncture needles. I adapted the diet to treat her specific issues, and within 6 weeks she was walking as well as if she had been taking an NSAID. Food therapy is always part of my long-range plan to improve health. It's been a way for me to help animals wean down off of medications and require less supplementation, along with decreasing their pain and improving their quality of life. It's also part of my plan to keep my patients from getting sick. Most people don't pay attention to their diet until they're sick. More and more information is coming out that we are able to prevent disease by eating low to moderate carb anti-inflammatory diet, and it's estimated that something like 500,000 cases of cancer each year on the human side would not happen if everyone were eating this way. So most people don't even cook for themselves. How can I expect them to cook for their pets? And while I rarely said this in practice, it's truly a matter of shifting your priorities. Do you need to spend the next 20 minutes getting angry at all the stupid stuff people say on Facebook or watching cat videos on YouTube? Do you need to binge watch all the episodes of the new show on Netflix? Or could you choose to turn the TV on in the kitchen and take 15 minutes to prepare a batch of food to throw into a slow cooker, let it cook for 10 hours, and then take another 15 minutes to mix it up and put it in a container in the fridge? Yes, you can, and yes, you can do this for yourself. So go out and get 2 crock pots if you're funny about things. Cook for yourself. Cook for your pets. This is the single most important thing that you can do to prevent health issues and to fix them for both you and your pets. This gives you absolute control over what's in your pet's food. You can figure out if they have food sensitivities. You can avoid things that you know will make them sick, and your pet will live longer and live a more comfortable life and have a much less chance of developing all the chronic diseases we're trying so hard to avoid. So thank you for sticking with me today, and a big thank you to Barney and the crew with the Animal Wellness Summit. It's awesome that you're able to get information to help your beloved fur baby so easily and from so many different perspectives. And if you take these folks up on their offer, you'll have access to all of this information all year. If you've got questions you'd like to get an integrative viewpoint on, message me on Facebook or email us, and I will answer them as best I can. I'm live every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you've got more questions about home cooking or the Crockpet diet, email us at the address above or check out the original crockpetdiet.com. Again, I'm Dr. Ruth Roberts, and I'm very grateful for your attention today. Remember, your pet's best health starts in the bowl.